William had always been curious about the locked door at the end of the castle's east wing. For 15 years he had walked past it countless times, watching servants hurry by with their eyes cast down, never daring to look directly at the heavy oak panels. The door was different from all others in Ravenshollow Castle. Where other doors bore the royal crest or decorative ironwork, this one remained plain, almost deliberately unremarkable, except for the unusual lock that seemed to shimmer, with an odd greenish tint. The young prince had asked his father, King Edmund, about the door many times throughout his childhood. Each inquiry was met with the same response, a stern look and words that brooked no argument. "Some doors are meant to remain closed, William. That is one of them." His mother, Queen Isabella, would simply change the subject whenever he brought it up, her face growing pale as if the mere mention of the door caused her physical pain. But William was no longer a child. At 21, he had proven himself in battle, earned the respect of the kingdom's nobles, and was being groomed to one day rule Ravenshollow. Yet this single mystery continued to gnaw at him like a persistent itch he could not scratch. The opportunity came on a night when the castle was quieter than usual. His parents had traveled to the neighboring kingdom of Aldrich for a diplomatic summit, taking most of the senior staff with them. Only a skeleton crew of guards and servants remained, and even they seemed more relaxed in the absence of the royal family's watchful eyes. William had spent the evening in his chambers, trying to focus on reports from the kingdom's tax collectors, but his mind kept wandering to the mysterious door. The reports could wait. This chance might not come again for months. He slipped out of his room just after midnight, moving through the familiar corridors with practiced silence. The castle's stone walls held the day's warmth, creating small drafts that made the tapestries flutter like restless spirits. His soft-soled boots made no sound on the worn stones as he made his way toward the east wing. The corridor leading to the door was dimly lit by a single torch, its flame dancing in the still air. William approached slowly, his heart beating faster with each step. Up close, the door looked even more mysterious. The wood was darker than he remembered, almost black in the flickering torchlight, and the strange lock seemed to pulse with that eerie green glow. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a collection of keys he had quietly borrowed from the castle's head steward earlier that day. Master Harold kept duplicates of nearly every key in the castle, organized on a large ring that he carried with obvious pride. William had waited until the old man was distracted during the evening meal, then carefully selected several keys that looked old enough to match the door's apparent age. The first key was too large. The second was the right size but wouldn't turn. William tried 3 more with no success, his palms growing damp with nervous sweat. He was beginning to think his plan was hopeless when the 6th key slid into the lock with a soft click. But, instead of the resistance he expected, the key turned effortlessly as if the lock had been waiting for this exact moment. The green glow intensified, pulsing like a heartbeat, and William heard something that made his blood run cold. The sound of footsteps approaching from behind. He spun around to see Captain Morris, the head of the castle guard, walking toward him with 2 younger guards flanking him. Morris was a grizzled veteran who had served the royal family for over 30 years. His weathered face was set in a grim expression, and his hand rested on the pommel of his sword. "Your Highness," Morris said, his voice carrying a weight that William had never heard before. "I'm afraid I cannot allow you to open that door." William straightened, drawing on his royal authority. "Captain Morris, I am the crown prince of this kingdom. I have every right to explore my own family's castle." But Morris didn't back down. Instead, he stepped closer, and William noticed something strange in the older man's eyes. There was fear there, yes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like relief. "Prince William," Morris said quietly, "there are some secrets that are kept for good reason. Your father gave me explicit orders about this door. No one, not even you, is to open it under any circumstances." "And what if I choose to ignore those orders?" William asked, his hand moving to the key that still protruded from the lock. Morris's expression grew even more serious. "Then I would be forced to stop you, Your Highness, even if it meant drawing steel against the future king." The 2 younger guards shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn between their loyalty to the crown prince and their duty to follow their captain's orders. William could see the conflict in their faces. For a long moment, the four men stood in the flickering torchlight, the tension thick enough to cut. William weighed his options. He could order the guards to stand down, but Morris's loyalty was to the king first and foremost. The captain would follow his orders even if it meant facing charges of treason later. But there was something in Morris's expression that gave William pause. The fear in the old soldier's eyes wasn't fear of punishment or of the king's wrath. It was something deeper, more primal. It was the kind of fear that came from knowing what lay beyond the door. "Captain," William said slowly, "what exactly did my father tell you about this door?" Morris hesitated, and in that hesitation William saw his opportunity. The captain wanted to tell someone. After 30 years of keeping this secret, the burden was clearly wearing on him. "He told me," Morris said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "that some mistakes can never be undone, and that the door must remain locked until the day he dies." William felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of mistake? But Morris had already said too much. He straightened his shoulders and stepped back into his role as the loyal captain of the guard. "I've said enough, Your Highness. Please step away from the door." William looked at the key in his hand, then at the three men facing him. He could feel the weight of the moment, the knowledge that whatever choice he made now would change everything. The door seemed to pulse with that strange green light, as if it too was waiting for his decision. Finally, he made his choice. Instead of stepping away as Captain Morris had demanded, William turned the key with a decisive twist. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire castle, and the heavy door swung inward on silent hinges. The green glow that had pulsed from the lock suddenly flared brighter, illuminating the corridor in an otherworldly light that made all four men shield their eyes. When the light faded, William found himself staring into a darkness deeper than any he had ever encountered. It wasn't simply the absence of light. It was as if the doorway led into a void that swallowed illumination itself. The torch on the wall behind them flickered wildly, as if something beyond the threshold was drawing away its flame. "Captain," Morris stepped forward, his face pale with a terror that transformed his weathered features. "Your Highness, please," he whispered, his voice trembling for the first time in William's memory. "Close the door. Close it now before it's too late." But William was transfixed by what he saw emerging from the darkness. At first it appeared to be nothing more than shadows shifting in the black void. Then the shadows began to take shape, and William realized he was looking at a spiral staircase that descended far deeper than should have been possible within the castle's foundation. The stairs were carved from the same dark stone as the door, but they gleamed with that strange green light, as if veins of some luminescent mineral ran through the rock. Each step seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, creating a hypnotic pattern that drew the eye downward into the depths. "What is this place?" William asked, his voice hushed with awe. Morris grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "It's the descent, Your Highness, the path your grandfather built when he made his bargain with the Shadow Court." The words hit William like a physical blow. He had heard whispers of the Shadow Court in old stories. Ancient beings who existed between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Creatures who made deals with mortals but always demanded a price far greater than what they offered. In return, my grandfather? William turned to face Morris, seeing confirmation in the captain's haunted expression. "King Albert made a deal with them?" Morris nodded slowly, his grip on William's arm tightening. 40 years ago, the kingdom was dying. Plague had taken half the population, the crops were failing, and enemy armies were massing at our borders. King Albert was desperate to save his people, so he sought out the forbidden knowledge in the ancient texts. He learned how to contact the Shadow Court. William's mind raced as pieces of his family's history began to fall into place. King Albert had been remembered as the savior of Ravenshollow, the ruler who had somehow pulled the kingdom back from the brink of total destruction. The history books spoke of his wise decisions and fortunate circumstances, but they had never explained how such miraculous changes had occurred so quickly. "What did he ask for?" William demanded. "Everything," Morris replied, his voice heavy with old grief. He asked them to save the kingdom, to restore the crops, cure the plague, and drive away the enemy armies. And they agreed. Then why do you speak of it as a mistake? Morris released William's arm and stepped back, his eyes never leaving the pulsing staircase. Because he didn't ask about the price until after the deal was sealed. The Shadow Court saved Ravenshollow, but in exchange, they demanded something from every generation of the royal bloodline. When each king dies, his heir must make a choice. William felt ice forming in his veins. What choice? To honor the bargain by descending these stairs and serving the Shadow Court for eternity, or to break the deal and watch everything your grandfather bought with his soul crumble to dust. The implications crashed over William like a tide. Every king since his grandfather had faced this impossible decision. His father, who had always seemed burdened by some invisible weight, must have known that one day he would have to choose between his own soul and the survival of his kingdom. But my father is still alive, William said, grasping at hope. The choice hasn't come yet. Morris's expression grew even grimmer. The Shadow Court grows impatient, Your Highness. The original bargain specified that the debt would be collected when each king died of natural causes. But they've begun to demand payment early. 3 months ago they sent an emissary. William's blood turned to ice. An emissary? A creature that looked almost human, but with eyes like holes in the world and a voice like winter wind. It delivered a message. The current king has 1 year to make his choice, or they will come to collect what they're owed. When was this message delivered? 9 months ago, Your Highness. The words hit William like a sword to the chest. His father had 3 months left to choose between eternal servitude and the destruction of everything his family had built. No wonder the king had been so distant lately, so quick to anger and slow to smile. As if summoned by their conversation, William heard something that made his heart stop. From far down the glowing staircase came the sound of footsteps. Not human footsteps. These made no sound against the stone, but somehow created ripples in the air itself, like something walking on the surface of still water. The 2 younger guards drew their swords, the steel ringing in the corridor, but Morris slowly shook his head. Weapons are useless against them, he said quietly. Prince William, you must close the door now. Your presence here, your royal blood so close to their realm, will draw them upward. But William found himself stepping closer to the threshold instead of backing away. The footsteps were growing louder, and with them came a sound like distant music played on instruments that had never been crafted by human hands. It was beautiful and terrifying at once, a melody that seemed to speak directly to some hidden part of his soul. They're coming, Morris breathed, and William saw sweat beading on the captain's forehead despite the cool night air. Through the darkness below, William began to see lights moving upward. Not torches or lanterns, but pale blue flames that danced, without fuel, carried by figures that were difficult to focus on directly. When he tried to look at them straight on, they seemed to slip away from his vision, existing more clearly in his peripheral sight. Prince William, came a voice from the depths, clear as crystal and cold as winter morning. We have been waiting for you. The nearest figure reached the top of the stairs and stepped into the doorway. William's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The being appeared to be a tall man in elegant robes, but the fabric seemed to be cut from starlight itself, shifting and shimmering with patterns that hurt to observe. Its face was aristocratically handsome, but the features kept changing subtly, as if William were seeing it through moving water. I am Lord Vex of the Shadow Court, the creature said, inclining its head in a mockery of court etiquette. I bring greetings from my realm to the future king of Ravenshollow. William found his voice, though it came out rough and unsteady. I am not king yet, Lord Vex smiled, revealing teeth that were too white and too sharp. Not yet, no, but soon enough. Your father grows weaker each day, does he not? The weight of our bargain is a heavy burden for mortal minds to bear. The words confirmed William's worst fears. His father's recent illness, his growing frailty. It wasn't natural aging, but the spiritual cost of carrying the Shadow Court's debt. What do you want? William demanded, trying to project more confidence than he felt. Lord Vex stepped fully into the corridor, and William noticed that the creature cast no shadow despite the torchlight. "We want what was promised to us 40 years ago, Prince William. A soul from the royal bloodline to serve in our realm for eternity. Your grandfather's debt has gone unpaid for far too long." William stared at Lord Vex, his mind racing through everything he had just learned. The creature's presence filled the corridor with an otherworldly chill that seemed to seep into his bones. Behind the Shadow Court Lord, more figures were ascending the stairs, their forms flickering between human and something far more alien. "You speak of my grandfather's debt," William said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "But I had no part in making that bargain. Why should I be bound by an agreement I never made?" Lord Vex's smile widened, and William caught a glimpse of something vast and hungry behind those two bright eyes. "Because you have enjoyed the benefits of that bargain every day of your life, young prince. The prosperity of your kingdom, the health of your people, the strength of your armies. All of this came from our intervention 40 years ago. The debt runs in your blood." Captain Morris stepped forward, his weathered hand still gripping his sword despite knowing it would be useless. The original agreement specified that payment would be due upon each king's natural death. King Edmund still lives. But circumstances have changed," Lord Vex replied, turning his attention to the captain with obvious amusement. "Your king's mind grows weak under the strain of our bargain. He speaks to shadows, sees threats where none exist, and neglects his duties while obsessing over that which cannot be changed. He is no longer fit to rule, and the kingdom suffers for it." William felt a surge of anger at the creature's words, even as he recognized their truth. His father had indeed been acting strangely in recent months, jumping at sounds only he could hear, and spending hours staring at the walls of his chambers as if watching invisible enemies. "You're the cause of his condition," William accused. "You're driving him mad deliberately. We merely remind him of what awaits," Lord Vex said with a casual shrug. "The human mind was not designed to carry such knowledge for extended periods. Most kings in your bloodline have made their choice within a year of learning the truth. Your father has proven remarkably stubborn." William's hands clenched into fists. "And if I refuse? If I tell you to return to whatever hell spawned you and never come back?" The temperature in the corridor dropped even further, and William's breath began to mist in the suddenly frigid air. The other Shadow Court members continued their ascent, and William could now see that there were dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, filling the staircase like a dark tide. "Then the bargain breaks," Lord Vex said, his voice taking on an edge like breaking glass. "The plague returns within a fortnight, worse than before. The crops wither and die. Your enemies, who have been held at bay by supernatural fear, will remember their courage and march on your borders. Within 6 months, Raven's Hollow will be nothing but a memory whispered by refugees." "You're bluffing," William said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't true. Lord Vex gestured elegantly, and suddenly the air above his palm shimmered like heat waves. An image formed in the distortion. Raven's Hollows, fertile fields stretching to the horizon under golden sunlight. But as William watched, the crops began to blacken and curl. The sky grew dark with unnatural clouds, and the very ground seemed to crack and bleed. "This is what your kingdom will become without our protection," Lord Vex said softly. "Your grandfather understood that some prices are worth paying. The question is whether you possess his wisdom." William looked at Captain Morris, seeing his own desperation reflected in the older man's eyes. The captain had served 3 generations of kings, had watched King Albert make his terrible bargain, and seen the weight it placed on every ruler since. Now Morris was watching another prince face the same impossible choice. "There has to be another way," William said desperately. "Some alternative that doesn't require eternal servitude." "Oh, but there is," Lord Vex replied, and something in his tone made William's skin crawl. "The Shadow Court is not unreasonable. We understand that times change, and we are willing to renegotiate the terms of our agreement." William felt a spark of hope, but it was immediately tempered by suspicion. What kind of renegotiation? Instead of one soul serving for eternity, we would accept a different payment. Every 7 years you would send us 7 of your subjects. Not just anyone, mind you. We have particular requirements. 7 individuals who possess certain qualities we find useful. The hope died in William's chest, replaced by a cold fury that surprised him with its intensity. You want me to sacrifice my people? Sacrifice is such an ugly word, Lord Vex said with mock offense. We prefer to think of it as selective recruitment. The individuals we choose would serve important roles in our realm. They would be well cared for in their own way. And what happens to them after they serve these important roles? Lord Vex's smile never wavered, but something shifted in his eyes, something that made William understand exactly what fate awaited anyone sent to the Shadow Court. That is not your concern, Prince William. Your duty is to your kingdom and your people as a whole. What are 7 lives against the prosperity of thousands? William felt sick. He looked at the 2 young guards who flanked Captain Morris, saw the fear and confusion in their faces as they tried to understand what they were witnessing. These were his people, brave men who served his family faithfully. The thought of sending anyone, let alone people like them, to whatever horrors awaited in the Shadow Court's realm made his stomach turn. I need time to consider this, William said finally. Time is a luxury you do not possess, Lord Vex replied. Your father's condition worsens by the day. Soon he will be incapable of making any decision at all, and the burden of choice will fall to you regardless. We require an answer now. Then my answer is no, William said, surprised by the strength in his own voice. I will not send my people to you, and I will not serve you myself. Find another way to collect your debt. The temperature in the corridor plummeted even further, and frost began forming on the stone walls. The torch behind them flickered wildly before going out entirely, leaving them in darkness broken only by the eerie green glow emanating from the Shadow Court members. You are making a grave mistake, young prince, Lord Vex said, and his voice now carried undertones that seemed to echo from vast distances. But we are patient creatures. We will give you 7 days to reconsider. 7 days to watch your kingdom begin its descent into chaos. 7 days to count the cost of your pride. The Shadow Court Lord began to retreat down the stairs, his followers flowing around him like living darkness. But before he disappeared entirely into the depths, he turned back to William with a smile that held no warmth at all. Oh, and Prince William, you might want to check on your father when you return to the main castle. I believe you'll find our conversation tonight has had effects. With that, Lord Vex vanished into the darkness, taking his otherworldly light with him. The staircase remained, glowing faintly with that sickly green radiance, but the immediate presence of the Shadow Court had withdrawn. William stood in the sudden silence, his heart pounding and his mind reeling from everything he had learned. Captain Morris reached for the door, clearly intending to close it, but William stopped him with a gesture. Leave it, William said quietly. If they want to return, that door won't stop them. As if responding to his words, the door swung shut on its own with a soft click, and the green glow faded from the lock until it appeared perfectly ordinary once again. Your Highness, Morris said hesitantly. What will you do? William looked at the 3 men who had witnessed this encounter, knowing that their lives had just become infinitely more complicated. First, I need to see my father. Then I need to find out if there's any information about the Shadow Court in the castle's archives. There has to be something the history's missed, some weakness we can exploit. But even as he spoke, William felt the weight of Lord Vex's prophecy settling on his shoulders. 7 days to find a solution to a problem that had plagued his family for 40 years. 7 days before the kingdom began to crumble around them. As they walked back through the castle's corridors, William couldn't shake the feeling that everything he had ever known about his life, his family, and his future had just changed forever. William's worst fears were confirmed the moment he entered his father's chambers. King Edmund sat in his ornate chair by the window, but he was no longer the strong ruler William had known all his life. The king's eyes darted constantly around the room, following movements that only he could see, and his hands trembled as they gripped the armrests of his chair. Father, William approached slowly, not wanting to startle the agitated king. King Edmund's head snapped toward his son, and for a moment, his eyes cleared with recognition. "William, you shouldn't be here. They're watching, always watching. They whisper in the walls and crawl through the shadows." "Father, I know about the shadow court," William said gently, kneeling beside the king's chair. "I opened the door. I spoke with Lord Vex." The effect of his words was immediate and terrifying. King Edmund's face went completely white, and he began shaking so violently that the chair creaked under the strain. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "No, you can't know. The knowledge will destroy you like it destroyed me. Like it destroyed my father before me." William reached out to take his father's hand, shocked by how cold and frail it felt. "Tell me what happened when grandfather made the bargain. Tell me everything." King Edmund stared at his son for a long moment, and William could see the internal struggle playing out across his features. Finally, the king seemed to reach some sort of decision, and his voice grew steadier, though no less haunted. "Your grandfather was a good man, William, but he was desperate. The plague had taken your grandmother, your aunt, and 2 of your uncles. I was the only heir left, and I was dying too. The physicians said I had days at most." King Edmund's eyes grew distant as he remembered. Albert found references to the Shadow Court in texts that dated back to the founding of the kingdom. Ancient warnings about beings who lived in the spaces between life and death, creatures who could grant any wish but always demanded more than they gave. How did he contact them? There was a ritual, blood from the royal line, spoken words in a language that hurt to pronounce, and an offering of something precious. "He used your grandmother's wedding ring." The king's voice broke slightly. The Shadow Court answered immediately, as if they had been waiting for someone to finally call. William felt his heart sinking as he listened to his father's account. What exactly did grandfather ask for? Everything we needed to survive. He asked them to cure the plague, restore the crops, strengthen our defenses, and ensure the prosperity of the kingdom for generations to come. He thought he was being clever. By asking for so much, surely beings with such power would demand payment equal to what they granted. But that's not how they work, is they? King Edmund shook his head slowly. They don't measure value the way mortals do. To them, gold and land and even lives are worthless trinkets. What they prize is something far more rare, the soul of someone with royal blood, someone whose bloodline has been touched by power for generations. They told Albert that one member of each generation would serve them eternally, beginning with his death. William tried to process this information, looking for some loophole or weakness he could exploit. What exactly does serve them eternally mean? His father's expression grew even more haunted. "I don't know, and I pray you never find out. But I've seen glimpses in my dreams, William. Visions of what lies beyond that door. The Shadow Court's realm is not a place meant for mortal souls. It's a twisted reflection of our world where nothing is quite what it seems, and every moment is designed to break down the barriers between reality and nightmare. Father, Lord Vex offered me an alternative. Instead of one soul serving forever, I could send them 7 people every 7 years." King Edmund's reaction was swift and violent. He surged to his feet with strength William didn't know he still possessed, grabbing his son by the shoulders. "Never," he hissed. "Never even consider such a bargain. Do you know what those 7 souls would endure? Do you understand what the Shadow Court does to mortals who aren't protected by royal blood?" William had never seen his father so intense, so desperate. "Tell me." "They hollow them out," the king whispered. "They remove everything that makes them human, their memories, their emotions, their very sense of self, and use what remains as vessels for their own purposes. It's a fate worse than death, William. At least in death the soul finds peace." The horrible certainty in his father's voice made William's stomach lurch. "How do you know this?" King Edmund released his son and sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older than his 53 years. "Because my father tried to find another way. He spent 20 years researching the Shadow Court, trying to break the bargain or find some alternative. He sent volunteers to their realm thinking they might accept substitutes for the royal debt. None of them came back, but sometimes on quiet nights he could hear them screaming. William felt cold spreading through his chest. The screaming stopped when he died and went to fulfill the bargain himself, King Edmund said quietly. The Shadow Court kept their word. They allowed the substitute souls to finally find rest when they received what they were truly owed. William began pacing the chamber, his mind racing through possibilities. There had to be something they were missing, some detail that could provide a solution. What about the archives? Are there other references to the Shadow Court in the castle's records? I've read everything, William. Every text, every chronicle, every scrap of parchment that might contain useful information. There are mentions of the Shadow Court throughout history, but they all say the same thing. Once you make a bargain with them, you cannot break it. You can only fulfill it or watch everything you love crumble to dust. There has to be something, William insisted. Some weakness, some rule they must follow that we can use against them. King Edmund studied his son's face, and for a moment, a ghost of his former strength flickered in his eyes. There is one thing, he said slowly, but it's not a weakness. It's an opportunity. William stopped pacing and turned to face his father fully. What kind of opportunity? The Shadow Court are bound by their own laws, just as we are bound by ours. They cannot simply take what they want. There must always be an exchange, always a bargain freely made. But that also means they are vulnerable during the negotiation process. How? King Edmund leaned forward, lowering his voice as if he feared being overheard. When they come to collect, there is a moment, just before the bargain is sealed, when both parties exist partially in each other's realms. The mortal soul gains temporary access to the Shadow Court's power, while they become briefly vulnerable to mortal weapons and mortal will. William's pulse quickened. You mean it's possible to fight them? Not fight exactly, but it might be possible to renegotiate from a position of strength rather than desperation. Your grandfather never had that chance because he didn't understand what he was dealing with. I never had it because I learned too late. But you, William, you know what they are and what they want. You could be prepared. What would I need to do? King Edmund rose again, moving to an ornate chest in the corner of his chamber. He opened it with a key from around his neck, revealing ancient books and scrolls that seemed to emanate their own aura of power and danger. There are rituals, he said, pulling out a leather-bound tome. Ways to strengthen the mortal soul before entering into bargains with otherworldly entities. Your grandfather found references to them but never had time to attempt the preparations. They require specific ingredients, particular timing, and absolute commitment. William took the book from his father's hands, feeling the weight of centuries. In its pages, the leather cover was marked with symbols that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. How long do these preparations take? Under normal circumstances? Months. But there are accelerated versions. Dangerous, ones that compress the process into days rather than seasons. The risk is enormous. If the rituals fail, they don't just leave you unchanged. They can shatter your mind or tear your soul apart entirely. William looked at the book, then at his father's haunted face. How much time do we have? Lord Vex gave you 7 days. But realistically, you would need to begin the rituals within the next 2 days if you want any chance of success. And William, King Edmund's voice carried a weight of absolute seriousness. Once you begin this path, there is no turning back. The rituals will change you in ways we cannot predict. You may succeed in renegotiating with the Shadow Court, but you will no longer be entirely human. William felt the weight of impossible choices settling on his shoulders. He could accept the Shadow Court's original bargain and condemn himself to eternal servitude. He could agree to their alternative and send innocent people to fates worse than death. He could do nothing and watch his kingdom crumble. Or he could attempt these dangerous rituals and risk destroying his own soul in a desperate gamble for a better outcome. There's something else you should know, King Edmund said quietly. The Shadow Court isn't the only supernatural force in this world. They have enemies, beings who oppose them for their own reasons. If you succeed in strengthening your soul enough to bargain as an equal, you might attract the attention of these other powers. Would that be good or bad? King Edmund's smile held no humor at all. That, my son, is a question I cannot answer, but I suspect you're about to find out. William spent the next 36 hours in feverish preparation, studying the ancient tome his father had given him, while gathering the bizarre ingredients required for the soul-strengthening rituals. The book was written in 3 different languages: Latin, Old Celtic, and something else entirely, that seemed to writhe on the page when he looked at it too, directly. Captain Morris had proven invaluable in acquiring the necessary materials. The grizzled soldier had connections throughout the kingdom that William had never suspected, and by the second day, they had assembled everything the rituals required: silver dust ground from coins minted during eclipses, water from 7 different sacred wells, herbs that only grew in places where violent deaths had occurred, and most disturbing of all, a vial of blood from someone who had died of pure fear. The rituals themselves had to be performed in a specific location, a place where the boundaries between worlds were already thin. The castle's highest tower proved to be perfect, its ancient stones having witnessed centuries of royal power and supernatural influence. William climbed the winding stairs as midnight approached on the 3rd day, carrying his materials and feeling the weight of impending doom. His father had insisted on accompanying him despite his fragile condition. King Edmund climbed slowly, pausing frequently to catch his breath, but his eyes held more clarity than they had shown in months. "The rituals will call to them," he warned as they reached the tower's peak. "The Shadow Court will sense what you're doing and try to stop you. They prefer to deal with mortals from a position of absolute power." William set up the ritual circle according to the book's precise instructions, using the silver dust to create intricate patterns on the stone floor. The symbols seemed to glow with their own inner light once they were complete, creating geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly, but somehow made perfect sense to his mind. "Are you certain about this, my son?" King Edmund asked, his voice heavy with concern. "Once you begin, there will be no stopping until the process is complete. If something goes wrong, then at least I'll have tried something other than accepting defeat," William replied, pouring the sacred waters into 7 small bowls placed at specific points around the circle. "I won't sacrifice innocent people to those creatures, and I won't condemn myself to eternal slavery without a fight." William stepped into the center of the circle and began reading the incantation from the ancient book. The words felt strange on his tongue, as if they were changing shape even as he spoke them. The air around him began to shimmer with the same heatwave distortion he had seen when Lord Vex displayed his visions, but this time the effect was centered on William himself. Pain struck him like lightning as the ritual took hold. It felt as if every cell in his body was being torn apart and rebuilt simultaneously. His vision blurred, then cleared with supernatural sharpness. He could see layers of reality that had been invisible before, threads of power connecting all living things, shadows that existed independently of any light source, and, most disturbing of all, the watchful eyes of otherworldly beings observing him from just beyond the edge of perception. The transformation accelerated, and William felt his consciousness expanding beyond the confines of his physical form. He could sense every living creature within the castle walls, feel their emotions and fears as clearly as his own. Captain Morris stood guard at the bottom of the tower stairs, his mind a storm of loyalty and terror. The servants in their quarters below tossed restlessly in their sleep, plagued by nightmares they wouldn't remember come morning. And then he felt them, the Shadow Court, rushing toward the castle like a tide of malevolent ice. They had sensed his ritual and were coming to stop him before he could complete the transformation that would allow him to bargain as an equal. "They're coming," William gasped, his voice distorted by the supernatural energies flowing through him. "Father, get back. This is going to be dangerous." But King Edmund stepped closer instead of retreating. "I've run from them for 23 years, William. I won't abandon you now." The temperature in the tower plummeted as the Shadow Court arrived. They didn't bother with the stairs. They simply materialized in the chamber, their forms more alien and terrible than they had appeared in the corridor below. Lord Vex led them, but now his human disguise was abandoned, revealing something that existed in too many dimensions for mortal eyes to properly process. "You meddle with forces beyond your comprehension, young prince." Lord Vex's voice seemed to come from every direction at once. Cease this ritual immediately, or face consequences far worse than our original bargain. William felt the ritual, fighting against the Shadow Court's presence, the competing supernatural energies creating a maelstrom that threatened to tear the tower apart. Stones began cracking in the walls and the wooden beams groaned under stresses that defied physics. "I will not be your slave," William declared, his voice now carrying harmonics that resonated through multiple planes of existence. "And I will not feed you my people. If you want to collect your debt, you'll deal with me as an equal or not at all." Lord Vex's form seemed to expand, filling half the chamber with writhing darkness. "You think these parlor tricks make you our equal? You are still mortal, still bound by the limitations of flesh and blood. We are eternal, unchanging, beyond your comprehension." But William could feel the lie in those words. The ritual was working, had already worked more than he had dared hope. He could see the Shadow Court members clearly now, see past their terrifying exteriors to the creatures beneath. They were powerful, yes, but they were not invincible. They had their own fears, their own limitations, their own desperate needs. "You're dying," William said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "Your realm is failing, and you need mortal souls not for servants, but as fuel to keep your world from collapsing entirely." The reaction from the Shadow Court was immediate and violent. Lord Vex's form contracted and then exploded outward in a wave of freezing darkness that would have killed any normal human instantly. But William was no longer entirely human. The ritual had changed him, strengthened him, given him the ability to stand against beings that had terrorized his family for generations. He raised his hand and golden light blazed from his palm, driving back the shadow. "That's why you've been so patient with our family's delays," he continued, pieces of the puzzle falling into place in his supernaturally enhanced mind. "That's why you offered alternatives rather than simply taking what you wanted by force. You can't survive without the willing cooperation of mortals." "Silence," Lord Vex shrieked, his voice now revealing the desperate edge William had suspected. "You know nothing of our needs or our nature." But William pressed his advantage, stepping forward despite the waves of supernatural terror radiating from the assembled creatures. "I know you need us more than we need you. The prosperity you brought to our kingdom. It wasn't a gift. It was an investment. You needed Ravenshollow to be strong and prosperous so that our royal bloodline would be worth harvesting." King Edmund watched in amazement as his son faced down the beings that had haunted their family for 40 years. The young prince was no longer the man who had entered the ritual circle. Power radiated from him in visible waves, and his eyes held depths that spoke of knowledge gained from sources beyond mortal understanding. "Here are my terms," William declared, his voice carrying the authority of absolute certainty. "The original bargain is void. You will remove all supernatural influences from my family and my kingdom. In exchange, I will help you find what you really need, a way to stabilize your realm without consuming mortal souls." The Shadow Court members recoiled as if struck. Lord Vex's form writhed with fury and something that might have been fear. "You cannot void a bargain sealed in blood and soul." "I can, and I am," William replied calmly. "Because I now understand what you never told my grandfather. The bargain was never really about payment for services rendered. It was about creating a sustainable source of the life energy you need to survive. But there are other sources, Lord Vex. Other ways to preserve your realm that don't require the enslavement and torture of innocent souls." William raised his other hand, and the golden light intensified until it filled the entire chamber. When it faded, the Shadow Court members were gone, not destroyed but banished back to their own realm to consider his proposal. Only Lord Vex remained, his form now flickering between his human disguise and his true appearance. "You think you have won," he said quietly, but the fury had gone out of his voice. "You think your newfound power makes you our master." "No," William replied, feeling the supernatural energies beginning to settle into his transformed body. "I think it makes us equals, and equals can negotiate." 3 months later, William stood once again before the mysterious door in the castle's east wing, but everything had changed. The lock no longer glowed with that eerie green light, and the door itself seemed somehow smaller, less ominous than it had on that fateful night when he had first turned the key. Lord Vex waited for him in the chamber beyond, but the Shadow Court Lord was no longer the terrifying figure who had once filled William with dread. The creature appeared smaller, more human, though still retaining the otherworldly beauty that marked his supernatural nature. "You have kept your word, Prince William," Lord Vex said as William descended the stairs that no longer pulsed with malevolent energy. "The rift stabilizers you helped us design are working perfectly. Our realm grows stronger each day." William nodded, still adjusting to the changes the ritual had wrought in him. His enhanced senses allowed him to perceive the Shadow Court's realm more clearly now, and what he saw was not the nightmare dimension he had imagined. It was a place of profound beauty, alien but not evil, filled with beings who had been struggling for centuries to save their dying world. "The energy collectors are working as well," William replied, referring to the devices they had collaboratively created over the past months. "They harvest the natural electromagnetic fields around places of strong emotion, battlefields, sites of great joy or sorrow, locations where the veil between worlds is thin. No more need for enslaved souls." Lord Vex inclined his head in acknowledgement. "We are grateful for your innovation. We had become so focused on the old ways, the traditional methods of survival, that we failed to see new possibilities. Your mortal perspective has proven invaluable." It had been a challenging 3 months of negotiation, experimentation, and careful trust building. William had used his transformed abilities to enter the Shadow Court's realm safely, working alongside their greatest minds to develop technologies that could sustain their world without requiring the suffering of mortals. The breakthrough had come when they realized that emotional energy could be harvested without harming its source. Places of intense feeling naturally leaked the kind of supernatural power the Shadow Court needed. "What of the other kingdoms?" William asked. "Have you approached them with similar offers?" "Several have agreed to host our energy collectors in exchange for various benefits," Lord Vex replied, "though none have been as creative in their negotiations as you were. Most rulers are content with traditional arrangements: gold for services rendered, protection in exchange for tribute." William smiled at that. His transformed state had given him insights into the supernatural world that went far beyond the Shadow Court. He had learned of dozens of otherworldly entities that had been making deals with mortal rulers for millennia, most of them far more straightforward than the complex bargain his grandfather had struck. "And my father? King Edmund's condition has improved significantly since the original bargain was dissolved," Lord Vex said. "The supernatural pressure on his mind has been removed entirely. He should make a full recovery within the year." That news filled William with relief. His father had already shown remarkable improvement in the weeks since the Shadow Court's influence had been lifted from their family. The king's mind was clearing, his strength returning, and his old confidence beginning to reassert itself. "There is one matter we must discuss," Lord Vex continued, his expression growing serious. "Your transformation was more extensive than either of us anticipated. You are no longer entirely mortal, Prince William. You will age more slowly than normal humans. Your physical abilities will continue to develop beyond human limits, and you will remain sensitive to supernatural influences for the rest of your life." William had already begun to notice these changes. His reflexes had quickened, his senses had sharpened, and he found himself aware of magical currents and otherworldly presences throughout the kingdom. It was not an entirely comfortable existence, but it was better than the alternatives he had faced. "Will this affect my ability to rule?" he asked. "On the contrary, I believe it will make you a more effective leader than any mortal king could be," Lord Vex replied. "You will be able to detect supernatural threats before they become dangerous, negotiate with otherworldly entities from a position of knowledge rather than ignorance, and protect your people in ways that purely human rulers cannot." As they spoke, William sensed another presence approaching the chamber. Captain Morris appeared at the top of the stairs, his weathered face showing a mixture of respect and wariness that had become his default expression when dealing with the transformed prince. "Your Highness, Morris called down. There are visitors from the neighboring kingdoms. Word of your unique negotiations has spread. They're requesting audiences to discuss their own supernatural problems. William exchanged a look with Lord Vex, who smiled with genuine amusement. It seems your reputation as a problem solver has grown beyond Ravenshallow's borders, the Shadow Court Lord observed. What kind of problems? William called back to Morris. The delegation from Aldrich mentioned something about a dragon that's demanding tribute, but only accepts virgin sacrifices, Morris replied. The representatives from Westmarch are dealing with a haunted forest that's been swallowing travelers. And the Northland emissaries speak of ice spirits that have been causing crop failures for 7 consecutive years. William sighed, feeling the weight of unwanted responsibility settling on his shoulders. His transformation had indeed made him uniquely qualified to deal with supernatural problems, but he had hoped for a period of peace to adjust to his new nature. It seems your real challenges are just beginning, Lord Vex observed. The supernatural world has taken notice of your success here. You have proven that traditional bargains can be renegotiated, that ancient problems can find new solutions. Every otherworldly entity with a grievance against mortals, and every kingdom plagued by supernatural troubles, will eventually find their way to your door. William considered this, weighing the implications. He could refuse to get involved, focus solely on ruling Ravenshollow and let other kingdoms handle their own problems. But his enhanced senses were already picking up currents of supernatural distress from across the continent. Dragons demanding virgin sacrifices, haunted forests, malevolent ice spirits. These were not just local problems but symptoms of a larger imbalance between the mortal and supernatural worlds. Lord Vex, he said finally, how extensive is your people's knowledge of other supernatural entities? Dragons, forest spirits, elemental beings. Quite extensive, the Shadow Court Lord replied, understanding immediately where William's thoughts were leading. We have existed alongside these beings for millennia. We know their natures, their needs, their weaknesses. And would you be interested in a consulting arrangement? Your people's knowledge combined with my unique position might be able to help more kingdoms than just Ravenshollow. Lord Vex's smile widened, revealing that while his teeth were no longer unnaturally sharp, they still held hints of his otherworldly nature. Prince William, I believe you may be proposing the beginning of a very interesting partnership. William looked up at Captain Morris, then back at Lord Vex. The future he had imagined for himself, quietly ruling Ravenshollow until his father's death, then taking the throne and living a relatively normal royal life, was no longer possible. His transformation had made him something new, something unprecedented in the mortal world. But perhaps that was exactly what the world needed. Very well, William said, straightening his shoulders and accepting the path that lay before him. Captain Morris, tell the delegations I will see them tomorrow morning, and send word to the royal scribes. I want detailed records kept of every supernatural problem we encounter, and every solution we develop. Creating a reference guide, Your Highness? Morris asked. Creating a new way forward, William replied. For too long, mortals and supernatural beings have existed in a state of mutual fear and exploitation. It's time to find a better balance. As William climbed the stairs back to the main castle, Lord Vex walking beside him in comfortable partnership, he reflected on the door that had changed everything. He had opened it seeking answers to his family's curse, but what he had found was a calling that would reshape not just his own destiny, but the relationship between the mortal and supernatural worlds. The door itself had become just an ordinary entrance now, its mystery solved and its power neutralized. But William knew that other doors waited to be opened, other secrets to be uncovered, and other bargains to be renegotiated on terms of equality rather than desperation. He had opened one door and found his destiny. Now it was time to help others open theirs.